Closing the gap, solution-focused brief therapy in East Asian family counseling, a counseling psychology perspective. Etiology. Acculturation stress. What is it? Acculturation stress has been defined as the strain that is associated with navigating away from one's culture of origin to another culture. One of the unique effects of acculturation stress has on family counseling is that it can often lead to acculturation dissonance in intergenerational immigrant families, as members of a family acculturate to varying degrees. This phenomenon can be better understood through Sue's worldview model. She describes each person's worldview as how a person perceives his or her relationship to the world, and is highly correlated with their life experiences. Following from this, when there are different degrees of acculturation between family members, their competing worldviews can lead to acculturation dissonance, which can contribute to conflict within the family. Often, resolving this conflict is the goal of family counseling. Why East Asian families? East Asians are categorized as Korean, Chinese, and Japanese. East Asian families were chosen because of a few reasons. First, they are one of the most rapidly growing populations in Australia, according to the Bureau of Statistics, but are underrepresented in utilizing mental health services. Secondly, East Asian culture is based off of collectivist cultural values that are well documented to result in poorer outcomes when paired with traditional mental health interventions, with higher dropout rates and lower counselor satisfaction ratings to their white counterparts. Lastly, East Asian families are highly enmeshed, often having grandparents, parents, and children living in the same space, magnifying the effects of cultural dissonance and the importance of family therapy. Differences in values between collectivist and individualist societies have been well documented in psychology literature. This table just provides a general review of the differences that may adversely affect counseling outcomes for East Asians. In the first two rows, self-actualization versus social awareness and maturation differences, we can already see how well-known frameworks such as Maslow's hierarchical model of needs and attachment theory would be in conflict with East Asian collectivist values. East Asians tend to value social acceptance over self-actualization and tend to continue to stay attached to their parents until death, not until when they reach adulthood. Additionally, East Asians value hierarchy and filial piety, which can clash with counseling methods that emphasize equal authority within family members and between clients and clinicians. So it comes now to no surprise that traditional therapy approaches often harm less acculturated individuals as it violates their values. Multicultural competency. How are we doing so far? First, counseling psychology has had poor outcomes for East Asians, with approximately 33% of East Asians missing a scheduled intake appointment. Aside from that, Australian clinicians may feel at a loss as most studies are based in the US, meaning that many findings may not be able to be generalized to our clients. An Australian mixed method study investigated multicultural counseling competency in Australian counselors and psychologists. After running a one-way ANOVA, clinicians from a bicultural background outperformed those from a single cultural background on cultural awareness, and those from multicultural backgrounds outperformed both. Results can be seen on the table, where we can see a large and significant difference. In the interviews, Australian clinicians also commented on the token nature of their training, especially on how they felt misunderstood by the clients as a therapist. Most prominently, one said, "I knew that there was no nuance to it. It was just kind of like, well, yes, but I can't imagine that that would make an Indigenous person feel like you actually got them and got who they were." Thus, multicultural competency is a key skill for all counseling psychologists and needs to be better supplemented with training. Intervention. Solution-focused brief therapy, or SFBT, is known as an outcomes-based intervention, which focuses on the counselors asking the client a specific set of questions to find their ideal solution. It originated from a family-focused context in Milwaukee and has been rigorously tested ever since. A systematic review found that SFBT is briefer than other approaches, and the Helsinki Psychotherapy Study, known as one of the most rigorous studies on SFBT, found statistically significant benefits when they compared it to short-term treatments. It used a large sample, randomized design, highly experienced therapists, and an extensive follow-up period. Questions asked in solution-focused brief therapy. Firstly, the miracle question invites the client to develop a vision of their ideal future. Outcome, exception, and relationship questions clarify the type of behavior or tasks clients want to see in this ideal future. Task assignment and feasibility questions help counselors to gauge the successfulness of their solutions, and compliments and redirecting help keep session focused on problem solving and away from blame or conflict. Here, I have decided to use the East Asian value of filial piety as an example. Filial piety is defined as respect, honor, and sacrifice on the part of children for their parents. Younger generations of East Asian families have been shown to adhere less to filial piety at the detriment of their elders, who very much still hold this value in high esteem. Navigating this issue using SFBT is demonstrated in the case illustration below with the Song family by Lee and colleagues. Here, we have the therapist starting the session by asking the miracle question. How will each of you know that a miracle has happened overnight? So that Andy, the father and head of the Song family, can envision his ideal future. The therapist then leads with an outcomes question to clarify what Andy means when he says, I will be more relaxed and not have to worry about my mum. The therapist asks, if I had a camera, what would I see? This allows Andy to clarify by picking out specific changes that he wants to see in his ideal solution. Thus, Andy responds, when we have breakfast, we will be chattier with each other. The importance of having breakfast together is linked to the family-centric culture of East Asians, and it is important that the therapist continues down the path that Andy has introduced. Here, we have cultural dissonance manifesting as a conflict of lifestyle choices. The grandchildren, Tom and Angie, would like to have bacon and eggs for breakfast, but their grandmother, Miss Song, prefers preparing soba noodles. The therapist is able to clarify the effects of this conflict on their relationship by asking, how would grandma making toast and eggs for breakfast make a difference to the both of you? Which Tom responds very positively to. Focusing on resolving these surface-level conflicts will be more effective than debating abstract ideas. Angie is also more willing to adhere to East Asian values of traditional filial piety to form this solution when she says, I promise I won't talk back to grandma and I will make my bed, which the therapist is able to gauge the probability of when she asks, how likely are you able to do that, using a feasibility question. On to the next slide, we can see here that Rebecca, the mother, states that the children feel suffocated by her intense presence, which suggests conflict around the value of filial piety. We can also find conflict around attachment styles. The grandchildren prefer a more distant attachment style, but the grandmother adheres to a closer, more hands-on style that encourages slower maturation, as typical of East Asian culture. In this second excerpt, the therapist introduced compliments to the grandmother, stating that she is a very important member, showing reverence for the East Asian family hierarchy. In the final excerpt, the therapist makes sure to redirect Mrs. Song's negative perceptions around the lack of filial piety she is receiving to keep her on track to finding a solution. Once Miss Song states that talking to her friends or connecting with the community helps her with these negative experiences, the therapist gently assigns tasks by asking, would you like going with Miss Kim to the senior center? This task-oriented approach suits the East Asian values of emotional self-control, where emotional expression is not at the forefront of therapy. So let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of this method. By far, the strongest advantage of the SFBT method is that it allows counselors to draw upon the worldviews of clients to find solutions to suit the unique blends of acculturation in each family. It also allows counselors that may not score as high on multicultural competency to still be able to deliver services in a culturally sensitive manner. SFBT's history of use with family also makes it consistent with the collectivist ideology of East Asians, and the solution-based focus appeals to the East Asian values of emotional self-control. Now, disadvantages of SFBT are that it needs further empirical studies done on East Asian populations to better reframe this intervention for them. Currently, most of the research are individual case studies, which, whilst rich, would benefit from more quantitative studies to increase reliability and internal consistency of the questions we've included. Lastly, the concept of a miracle question and compliments may go against East Asian values of emotional self-control and may have to be reimagined when tailoring this intervention in future studies. Recommendations. Lastly, we talk about the gaps in literature. There is a lack of research on interventions for East Asian elderly, as most studies use higher acculturated college students. This is unfortunate, as elderly immigrants are vulnerable to higher rates of depression and are more ostracized by Western clinical interventions. We also need research to gauge the degree of obstructions to accessing mental health for East Asians may have inflated dropout rates that is over-attributed to low multicultural counselor competency. Lastly, literature based in Australia is lacking, and future research will need to focus on Australian populations. To wrap up, incorporating solution-focused processes may give clinicians more confidence in their treatments, despite not having as much confidence in their multicultural competency.